Hello everyone. Welcome to Plenary 2 of the International Safety at Sea webinar series. My name is Laura Key and I will be your host for today. The International Safety at Sea event is an annual conference organized by the Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore as part of its commitment to promote safety at sea. This year, we are heartened to have over 600 participants from more than 60 countries joining us, with key decision makers from governments around the world, as well as representatives from different sectors of the maritime industry. Thank you for joining us, and welcome back if you are logged in for our other sessions too. This morning, we discussed the mental health and wellness of seafarers during Plenary 1, and how we could help them cope better during a pandemic. Next, for Plenary 2, we will focus on ship safety, reflecting on incidents, causality, and the way forward. To start, it is my pleasure to invite Mr. Jacob Larsen, Head of Maritime Safety and Security at BIMCO, to deliver the keynote presentation. Mr. Larsen, please.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jacob Larsen, and I'm Head of Maritime Safety and Security in the Shipowner Association, BIMCO. It's a great honor to be chosen to deliver the keynote speech in this section on incidents, casualty, and the way forward. What I want to do is reflect a little on the past, draw on my conversations with safety managers from companies all over the world, and finally try to set the scene for you to look ahead. I do not pretend to be a safety prophet who has all the answers to the many developing safety topics within the maritime industry. What I hope to achieve is that my speech provides an interesting backdrop against which your extremely competent and knowledgeable panel can engage in what will hopefully be a rewarding discussion. Catastrophe. The meaning of this word is all too familiar for anyone working in the maritime industry. Right now, I bet you're all thinking about some of the many maritime catastrophes we have witnessed in the past decades. While each of them has been horrific, especially for those people directly involved, they have also constituted an occasion to pause and reflect on what could be done to prevent reoccurrence. I think it's well known to all how, for example, the Titanic disaster in 1912 paved the way for numerous safety regulation improvements. These covered a wide range of topics, such as lifeboats, 24/7 radio watch when at sea, and rules for the height of watertight bulkheads. Step by step throughout history, we have witnessed improvements to the safety of seafarers. Still, it wasn't until 1960 that we saw the first comprehensive version of the SOLAS Convention. And the ISM code, which we all take for granted nowadays, did not see the light of day until it was developed on the back of another disaster at sea, the sinking of the Ro-Ro ferry Herald of Free Enterprise in 1987. The ISM code brought about quite a cultural change in the shipping industry, and all of a sudden, every company had to adopt their internal management processes to the plan, do, check, act cycle. So all in all, everything seems to be going in the right direction, and we should be all satisfied with the way things are working out. Or should we? The reason I ask the question is that seafarers are still getting hurt and losing their lives. When researching for this speech, I realized that credible data are hard to come by, mainly because some flag states are not consistent in their data gathering and data sharing. In the European Maritime Safety Agency, I did find some reasonably reliable statistics on the EU-flagged merchant fleet. The trend is quite clear. The variation from year to year is such that it's difficult to rule out coincidence as part of the explanation. I guess a conservative interpretation of the numbers is that in terms of scale, the problem is unchanged. The big question is why? I'm not even going to try to answer this question because I'm sure the answer is complex and the result of many types of factors. What I will do is reflect on some of the characteristics of our industry, which I have deducted from the anecdotes collected in conversations with seafarers and office staff from many different companies. For a start, I want to show you a way of illustrating an operational capacity, in this case, a ship. A capacity like a ship is basically made up of three components: equipment, personnel, and procedures. And to be fully operational, the three components have to be enabled by training or drills. Some training will be centralized and be part of, for example, the basic seamanship training. Other training will be equipment and/or operation specific. A ship will be suited for a certain range of operational scenarios, for example, a certain amount of work under set conditions. But if the scenarios are changed too much, it creates an unbalance and the capacity is falling short. For example, if a non-ice class ship is sent to the Arctic, it may be able to do the job under very benign conditions, but once the Arctic environment starts to show its teeth, the risk increases. And very logically, if you degrade any of the building blocks, you create an unbalance that needs to be compensated for to return the capacity to full operational capability. For example, if a ship with a given minimum safe manning has its crew reduced, the result is more fatigue, less resilience in case of emergencies, and consequently increased risks. Now, please push the capacity model of a ship to the back of your mind while I try to explain what can challenge the ship as a capacity. I'm talking about factors or trends that are in some cases constant and in other cases constantly developing. Here are a few examples of these trends. Shipping is a business. We're in it for the money, and put very simply, there are two ways of making a higher profit. Either you increase the revenue or you decrease the cost. And in a market under pressure, cost savings tend to be the chosen instrument, or the only available instrument, some would argue. Risk normalization is the gradual process through which dangerous practices become accepted over time. This is normal human behavior and requires a focused safety culture drive to prevent from happening. Shipping is globalized, and particularly in some areas, we are seeing the full effect. For example, crewing tends to be increasingly centered around certain countries. Technical improvements. We still get better and better at producing sophisticated and reliable equipment. Digitalization is growing. With that comes many opportunities, but also many risks. Cybersecurity is just one of them. And finally, automation, and where possible and cost-effective, processes and functions are automated. So what happens when all these factors start trending? Well, they begin to influence the building blocks of the capacity model, and they begin to influence the scenarios for which the ship was designed. Sometimes the influence is positive, and sometimes the influence is negative. Some examples. When customers impose requirements for certain procedures or equipment, it adds to an already overwhelming amount of rules and regulations that has to be incorporated in safety management systems. Incorporating detailed procedures for every eventuality in a safety management system results in overwhelming amounts of procedures which no single person is able to digest. While such procedures may provide a very nice paper trail for audit purposes, they are not necessarily very likely to be followed in real life. There's simply too much information. Technical improvements are for sure a significant contributor to safety improvements, but they are a two-edged sword because they can lead to overambitious rationalizations and consequent unbalance to the capacity. Cost savings is a classic, and it often impacts maintenance of machinery and equipment, as well as the quality of systems, equipment, and, for example, personal protective equipment used on board. So it appears that new safety risks will always emerge in the maritime industry, at least if we continue down the path we have been following for the past many years. Not to mention the safety risks that comes from human involvement. Everywhere where humans are involved, human errors will occur. While an incident-free ship is something we strive towards, reality is that human error and coincidence still causes accidents. But it's still interesting to ponder about how we can reduce some of the unbalances to the system caused by the constant changes in our industry. I would argue that we need to look at the plan, do, check, act cycle. Perhaps this management model's reliance on learning by doing is something to look further into. Perhaps there is an over-reliance on identifying errors through accident investigations and then compensate for them by introducing new or changed procedures or equipment. Perhaps we could do more to harvest the full benefit of not only our own errors, but also those of our peers and competitors. This is at least something BIMCO and a large group of other industry stakeholders have attempted to do by establishing a knowledge hub called Together in Safety, which I encourage you all to visit after the conference. But this knowledge sharing hub is hardly the silver bullet that will make safety issues in the shipping industry magically disappear. Much more ideas are needed, ideas which captures some of the trends before they become issues and which need not necessarily wait for accidents to happen before lessons are learned. With my little talk, I've tried to set the scene for an interesting discussion about safety, incidents, and the way forward. I have provided you with a model for a capacity, such as a ship, with the building blocks personnel, equipment, procedures, and training. I have explained how any capacity is designed for a certain range of scenarios and how the capacity is under constant influence, both positive and negative, from different trends like technological improvements, digitalization, and commercial pressure. With that, I hope that I have managed to set the scene for your further deliberations. Our panel can boast decades of shipping experience and in-depth knowledge of maritime safety, so I'm certain that you are in for an interesting discussion. Thank you again for giving BIMCO the opportunity to speak, and my best wishes for a successful conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Larsen, for setting the stage for our plenary discussion. Marine casualties and incidents are always a stark reminder of what can go wrong. But they also serve as learning points on how we can improve systems, processes, and methodologies. How have past incidents helped to shape matters pertaining to ship safety today? What has changed in the last decade for ship safety, notwithstanding new challenges brought about by the global pandemic? Our moderator for today's panel discussion on ship safety, reflecting on incidents, causality, and the way forward, is Captain Kunal Nakra, Deputy Director of the Transport Safety Investigation Bureau at the Ministry of Transport, Singapore. Our panelists are Mr. Jakob Damgaard, Loss Prevention Manager at Britannia P&I, Captain Vijay Cherukuri, General Manager HSEQA at Executive Ship Management Private Limited, and Captain Kevin Wong, Port Master at the Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore. Do note that if you have questions for our panelists, please click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Captain Kunal, over to you, please.
Thank you, Laura. A very good day to all of you. And a big thank you to Mr. Jacob Larsen for sharing his thoughts on how the past incidents can pave the way forward. In these trying times, as many of us have been working from home, shipping has not slept. Being the engine of world trade because of its 24/7 nature, ensuring ships are safely operated and managed is even more relevant. Our industry has seen a lot of changes over the years. These catastrophes, as Mr. Larsen shared, have resulted in the tragic loss of lives and damage to the environment, as well as economic losses. While incidents and their associated losses tend to create a negative perception, the industry is not as unsafe as most people might think. And I would like to put forth this thought for our audience that such incidents actually give us an opportunity to learn so that we can improve and be better. We have a tall order for this plenary, and I'm honored to be sharing the stage with three experienced mariners who in their respective areas of expertise and establish credibility. And in no particular order, we have Vijay from Executive Ship Management, who is an avid sports fan, especially cricket, both in front and behind the stumps, followed by Jakob Damgaard, a dual certificate engineer and a master mariner from Britannia P&I Club, who loves hiking and cycling. And Kevin, portmaster, who I dare say has not played golf since the pandemic began, but he has been extremely busy in keeping our port safe. He is well known in the Singapore Maritime fraternity. So thank you all for being here. Some of you may recall answering 2 questions at the time of registration. I would like to start this plenary trying to get a sensing of the ground by looking at the responses of those questions. Can we have this question on the screen, please? First question was, in your experience, how have you seen the industry's safety record evolve over the past decade? An interesting response rate shows an increase in incidents as far as the industry is concerned. And which of these do you think is the major cause? Human factors taking the large chunk of the pie. So perhaps I could move to Jakob. What do you reckon is an insight the industry can glean from these surveys?
Thank you, Captain Kunal. Thank you for all who have taken the time to answer our poll here. It's, for me, a very interesting result we are seeing here in Q1, that 60% of all the participants says that they're experiencing an increase in incidents within the last decade. My own perception, also by studying various reports from various authorities, have given me the indication that we are seeing a decline, a downwards trend. So that so many people, 60%, have a different perception is of course very interesting. And what the answer is for this, of course, I'm not in a position to give a conclusive answer on. It may be that in the last decade we are seeing more exposure, we're seeing more media cover of various accidents, which then give the impression that we are seeing more incidents than we did in the past. Of course, if we're having an upward trend, this of course is of concern. As Jakob Larsen just explained in his speech, we have the ISM code. It is been around since the mid-90s, should be well implemented. A lot of other safety initiatives are being done. So we should, of course, see the fruit of this and see a downwards trend. It may be due to reporting, the data gathering also. We see certain ways, certain flag states, they have the requirements of what you have to report of larger incidents. Also in insurance have the same. In vetting, in commercial, you might have requirements to report certain incidents. However, it may not be everything that is reported, so obviously it could always be interesting to see what kind of incidents it is that these people who say they see an increase is actually the ones they see an increase in. It may be is some of these smaller incidents which are not reported and go below the reporting radar, so to speak. So that could be, of course, interesting to look further into. As to the regulations, increase in regulations, well, if there's an increase, it definitely shows, but that should also be kept in mind, even though we have a downward trend, is that regulations itself does not necessarily embed safety. It is a minimum requirements of certain things you have to have in place, equipment you have to have on board. Like, per se, SOLAS may require you to have on board oxygen measurement devices if you have to go into enclosed spaces. However, the regulation alone does not make the crew on board use this correctly and all this. This is again down to the word safety culture. That is the thing that makes sure that the implemented rules and all these are actually used in a way so they actually enhance safety instead of just being a compliance culture. So I think that's very much what is maybe can explain some of these this very interesting poll.
Thank you very much, Jakob, for your insight. You're right. I mean, it doesn't necessarily imply that there are an increase in regulations, and we should be seeing a downward trend. And it goes back to Jacob's point on the Plan, Do, Check Act. Like you rightly alluded to, if you have a regulation, and if the crew on board for variety of reasons are not implementing it. Of course, we need to look at why that is so, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you need more regulations, because that is not going to necessarily solve the problem.
No.
But is it something similar to what Britannia's own survey results and surveys have shown? Of course, you rightly said that it's not an increase, but what is Britannia's results like in terms of safety, how should I put it, safety statistics?
Yeah. Well, I brought along a couple of slides here from the Britannia's own, and tried to show how it looks from our perspective. On the left, you have percentage of claims within the last 5 years. Here you'll see the majority is cargo, which is not surprisingly, being we are a P&I club, we are third-party liability, so a lot of claims are about cargo being damaged during voyage, etc. But we also have 25% of the crew, which is where we will see more of the injuries and the incidents, which is more what we are discussing today. And then we have very low, between 1% of groundings and also of collisions. So of this we see a quite low stat. From Britannia, it's been, I think, we see a downward trend in certain areas. However, we also see some bigger ones in the ones that maybe give more exposure, and some of them who have a higher value and cost contribute to it. So that's a bit what we are showing on the right side. Here you can see that an incident like grounding, we have less than 1% of all our claims are grounding. However, when it's coming to the actual value of this claim, you can say that the payout we do is more than 17. It's about 17%. Cargo is only 21, even though it's 51 of all the claims we have. Damage to property, again, 26%, even though the amount we have is only 6%. So it shows that there are still claims there, and it's very much, you can say, that the high value claims that very much takes up the trend here now. My next slide goes very much with the poll again, the Q2, which showed human factor as the overall main contributor to the incidents. This is, again, for the last 5 years within Britannia, where we're looking at what are the contributing factors have been identified. Again, being a P&I club, all our incidents is not as such incidents as we discuss here today, where something goes wrong, some got injured. It can also be illnesses, but we see equipment failure. Then we have third party, which is a bit like, again, we are insurance company, we are not government institution, so we don't always have access to all the materials, so we can only say it's third party contributing. But then, very obvious, human element is almost 50%. Mr. Larsen also said it during his speech here, that the human factor is still a significant thing. So that goes very well with what the poll also showed in the Q2 poll. The reason for the human error, the human element, which I prefer to call it, is, well, it is maybe always easy to point at the human element, because somewhere down the line you can always say there was a person involved, and if he had done something wrong or something differently, it wouldn't have gone wrong. So it is also sometimes maybe the easiest way to point at the human as the factor. But then we also know through the years there's been increasing pressure on seafarers. There's been a lot of focus on their mental health and all these things. Again, increase in regulation doesn't make this any easier. Might be also increased commercial pressure. There are a lot of things, a lot of jurisdictions where they're enforcing regulations very hard, and they can have consequences for the crew if they actually get caught in something which they really don't have any influence on. So there's a lot of factors, and of course, with the situation we have now with a global pandemic, this have only increased on the stress and pressure which a seafarer is under these days. So, of course, the human error is still a very important factor of these.
Thank you, Jakob, and you're absolutely right. And Mr. Jacob Larsen also rightly said, wherever there are humans, there will be a human element or human factor, not necessarily an error, because that is just a trigger for that particular accident or casualty to take effect. what has influenced the individual to comply, not to comply with certain procedures, even though they're ingrained into their DNA, is a complex issue. But we recently had an incident of Mauritius, and again, many of you would recall the name of the vessel, the Wakashio, that ran aground. Without going into specifics, because it's an active investigation, we don't know much fact about it. I would still want to briefly touch on that. We talked about human factors. We talked about what the audience had answered. Do you reckon, Captain Vijay, this is something, a matter of addressing the safety culture from a holistic point of view? Because, like I said, we don't know the cause of the accident. We aren't going to know the cause of the accident till the investigations are officially out. But what are your thoughts from a ship manager's perspective, from a safety standpoint? Is there something that needs to be inculcated from the organization top down?
Thanks, Captain Kunal. To address this human element, we, executive ship management, have made extra efforts to enhance seafarers' capabilities. That is, enhance their knowledge, skill, and attitude, so as to enable efficient and safe performance by them. So when we address these three, we are taking care of the human element. In fact, my company identified this human element challenge nearly 2 decades ago, and we started our training institute, Samudra Institute of Maritime Studies, by focusing on hands-on practical training. Here, in addition to knowledge, where we say the do's and don'ts, how to go about the jobs, Seafarer is given specific, operation-specific or technical equipment-specific skills. Say, for example, in navigation, skills are practiced on simulator for navigating in narrow channels like Singapore Straits or Turkish Straits, or ice navigation, or similarly large vessel maneuvering, as in when a master who's been in command of say MR tanker or an LR tanker is being promoted to an Aframax, or a master who's been in command of a 14,000 TEU container is going on a 20,000 TEU container. So we are giving them skills-based training as in live scenarios, so they can actually practice it and reduce, as in get more clarity. And so as they practice more, their confidence increases. And when they go and practice the same things on board, they reduce the errors. The errors are reduced. Now, similarly for promotions, a third mate, when he goes first time on board a ship, he's not very sure, he's not so confident. So we put them on for a few days on the simulator, make them practice and see what to expect and how to go about doing this watch. That includes when to call master, speaking up, challenge and response, and so on and so forth. Same third mate, when he's getting promoted to second mate, again he would have a promotion skill-based training and assessment with regarding to, say, EGDIS and charts. In case, how to plan passage on EGDIS, how to correct EGDIS, or in case EGDIS fail, what to do, and how to use paper charts, correction, and so on. When the same person gets to become a chief mate, then on cargo aspect. Right. Similarly, when he's getting into command, he's becoming a master, how to oversee, how to go about exercising his command, right, especially navigation. Here, for master is in congested waters, whether we talk about harbor approaches, pilotages, approach to berthing. So throughout each stage of his career progression, skills are enhanced.
Right.
So this is not only navigators, we even focus on engine officers, whether it be ballast water systems or cargo systems like Framo or Marflex, or even electrical practices. Similarly for ratings. Now, all this was on skill. Now, to address the behavioral aspect, as part of bridge team, navigators are made to practice BRM, that is bridge resource management concepts, on the simulator, such as situational awareness, communication and briefing, decision making, judgment, challenge and response, and so on. So we provide them normal and emergency navigation scenarios and make them handle the situations as a team. So this could be sudden failure of a steering or a blackout or a sudden loss of propulsion or sudden excess RPM or sudden onset of heavy weather. Right. So they anticipate failure, so they know what to. These are high consequence events which occur not regularly, but we are preparing people for them. Now all this is show-based training. This training continues even on board. Similarly, on-the-job training by the seniors by guiding them. And we also have through computer-based systems what we call electronic performance support system. So the learning is strengthened in practical scenario. All this what we discuss right now is on the learning curve.
Right. You're right. I mean, naturally the seafarer is competent, is a competent seafarer and needs to be skilled along the way. And as what your company has done, I'm quite certain many companies adopt the same principles of ensuring the seafarers are equipped along the way. More importantly, how does this narrative fit into the safety culture angle? Because you can train as much as you wish, but if the end result is that the individual does not resonate, or his ideologies of what is considered safe and his risk tolerance or the operating envelope with which he's hardwired, he or she is hardwired, how does that align with the company's narrative of safety culture? That is what I would think is the order of the day, because like I said, many companies like yourselves have those systems in place and still accidents happen. The question is, at some point, the risk envelope for company A versus company B might be different. Some are willing to take the risk normalization as we call it. So how does the safety culture get built over a period of time? Because if you don't have a strong safety culture, you will have a weak foundation. And with a reduced risk operating envelope, you're looking at normalization of risk becoming the norm, and thus leading to a path which you don't want to go on. So any thoughts on safety culture developments?
Now, the first step is the learning curve, and where we are not only conveying our expectations, we are also educating them on the rights and wrongs. Then comes the onboard culture, and then the third step is validation by the company. Now let's talk about onboard culture. Here our keynote speaker, Mr. Larsen, rightly identified risk normalization can be prevented by focused safety culture. So through this culture, what we see is seafarers tend to lower their level of acceptable risk and lower their level of undue risk-taking behavior, so that their actions are positive and add value to safe operation. Through this process, we are influencing them to exhibit such behaviors consistently. For this, we encourage seafarers to intervene by way of stop work authority, and we encourage them to identify and report unsafe acts and conditions for encouraging safety culture. We use other behavior-based tools to reinforce safe and correct behavior on board. So bottom line, what is happening? The ship staff are monitoring themselves and supporting each other and improving. But it doesn't end there. Thereafter, company has a role. Company carries out validation. That is, we have a check and balance in place. We monitor ship staff on scene and give feedback on implementation of best practices. Okay. How do we do this? We do sailing audits covering all aspects of ship operation: navigation, cargo, machinery upkeep, environmental performance, health, hygiene, mooring, so on. So, and especially specifically high focus on navigation, because as Jakob said, it's a high consequence and highest risk. So here what we do is we do these dynamic audits by our internal auditors, and also we get audits done by external auditors. So that's for navigation, even environmental performances. Further to that, we randomly pick up ships and ask for VDR records, voyage data records. And along with those, we look at their passage plan and other data and review and give feedback to the ships. So what is happening? We are seeing them, how they are performing in live scenarios. We do this for other aspects, environmental aspect and others too. So based on this reviews, we identify gaps, raise non-conformities, report near miss and so on, and share, improve our SMS training accordingly and give feedback to the seafarers. Through this process, we get our seafarers to mainly pick up the weak signals and act early to break the error chain. So they function as a member of a cohesive bridge team. Here, recent times industry has come out with guidance to address human element challenges. I like to mention two of them specifically. First is OCIMF and Intertanko publication, Behavioral Competency Assessment and Verification for Vessel Operators. And second is OCIMF publication, Guide to Best Practice for Navigation Assessments and Audits.
Right. Thank you, Captain Vijay. I think that's quite a bit of information from a ship manager's perspective, and naturally the suggestions that Captain Vijay has offered can be useful for any shipping company. But Jakob, from a club's perspective, seeing the number of claims that you've come across, is there a way for nipping the problem of risk normalization in the bud, for the want of a better phrase? Kill it while you can, in the sense that you don't want to reach a stage where the safety culture becomes so diluted that it is very difficult to turn back, because that's a downward slope from there on, and we can't recognize the elephant in the room. So any thoughts on nipping the problem in the bud?
Yeah. I would say when we tend to look at accidents and incident investigation and all this, I think it's very important that you as a ship owner take a holistic approach and not just focus on the seafarer on board, that he's doing errors or what he is, because this is all related, as Captain Vijay also says, it's come from ashore as well. You need the support from there. So when we try to encourage our members is to take this holistic approach. When you say human factors, human error, why did this error occur? Was it due to, can you say, negligence by the person? Well, then you have. Or was it due to simply the procedure he was to follow is too complex, or it's too long, or it's too difficult, it's difficult to understand? I think in my past, I've seen several accident investigations which conclude that the reason why the accident happened was because he didn't follow this procedure, and that's why it happened. And that might well be the fact, but it is important to try to go that step further down to try and look at why didn't he follow that procedure. Is it because it is just not relevant, or it is not easy to follow? Because again, when you see long, complex procedures, it is often a way to cut corners, because you see, this takes too much time, it's too difficult, I just do it quickly, you know, I've done it so many times before, it's routine work, and then you see the incident happen. So it's very important when you do all this accident investigation, you really dig into it, and then you try to see where you can improve your system. It's not just enforcing another procedure on top of the other procedures. It might be you also need to amend your procedures, change them. Some procedures may even have to go out at a certain stage. It's also why it's very important to quite regularly also review your safety management system to make sure that the procedures you have are actually relevant, that it's not this big paper monster that's just been building up over years, which sometimes may be a bit more difficult when you have it digital, because you don't have the sense of how big the system is. All this, as a club, we try to, of course, with our members, when there's not a pandemic around, we do quite a lot of seminars where accident investigation have been on the agenda, where we try to tell them about how to do a good, robust accident investigation, where you learn how to, like, say, peel the onion. So you, by the end, you get into what you in the old days referred to as the root cause, even though today you might have more contributing factors. We also try to assist members if they have anything in what aspects, different views they can maybe take it. And then, of course, is also the thing about sharing knowledge, which Mr. Larsen also referred to, the Together in Safety, share the findings you have, the learnings we make, we try to do anonymously.
Yeah.
But there is a lot to gain from this, and it is a very important thing. That's also why we support various things like SINS, which is within the container industry, the Container Incident Notification System, which is all about sharing different cargo incidents along container liners.
Yeah.
All these are helping to try to, of course, identify risk and try to mitigate them at the best way possible. Regarding also the safety culture, there's also new theories coming up all the time. There's someone called Safety 2, where you look more at the positives instead of the negatives. You don't see the human as a liability, but actually a point of resource, which have this very inward within safety resilience, the ability to bounce back, to adapt to a certain situation. So that is where you try to gain a lot of knowledge from the positive things, a bit like also Vijay said, like VDR downloading. You look at it, but maybe not just to identify where it went wrong, but also to give positive feedback to your crew members. I think that is extremely important. Everybody wants positive feedback, but when they're complimented on things, they also get a higher sense of earning and belonging to it. Again, also with the procedures, often they're made ashore and then they're sent out on the ship. Often there's maybe a long distance between them. If somehow you can try to couple the two together, give them a bit more ownership about what procedures. I've seen shipping companies where actually the ship itself produces a large amount of the procedures, so the operational procedures, and it works very well. I think it's you can see the crew are very engaged in it. They feel they have ownership. They're not just, of course, just sending in things to send. The same with all the near-miss reporting and all this, that they see that it actually has a purpose, that it's not just sending in to have a KPI to cover, that you actually get something back. You identify some problems out of that. So I think very much safe quality is to engage with the crew, which maybe sometimes lacks.
No, thank you. Thank you once again, Jakob, for bringing this point up. And before we take on, we've got some questions from the audience, but before we take on, I'd like to tap on Captain Kevin's experience as a port master. Singapore's obviously a very busy port. Do you see risk normalization being quite prevalent in terms of people just taking risks within the port, even though they know how busy it is? Is there something that is quite common?
Well, thank you, Kuna. Rightly said. As a busy port, I've seen my share of incidents and also responded to quite a number of them. Looking at some of the reviews, I personally feel that when it comes to incident, at the end of the day, the difference boils down to the individual, which is why it is important for us to imbue a culture of safety, both for the seafarers as well as the people who are working ashore, managing the seafarers. One thing I would like to see would be also more involvement of the commercial department as well as the chartering department in this conversation on safety.
Right.
Right. And then, okay, I think many of you are aware that in Singapore, the National Maritime Safety at Sea Council was set up to spearhead the drive for maritime safety at the national level. And then the council provides advice, endorse safety initiatives, as well as campaigns, right, to push, to raise awareness of safety at sea. One example would be MPA works with the council as well as the Harbourcraft Safety Working Group to develop a set of guidelines for safe transfer of persons at the anchorages, because we notice a number of incidents resulting from people not following safety processes that led to injuries and even loss of life. Right? I'd like to share that in the Port of Singapore, we have seen a drop in the number of major incidents over the past decades, from 0.8 incidents per 1,000, sorry, 0.8 incidents per 100,000 movements in 2009. And last year, it was 0.12 incidents per 100,000 movements. Right? Thankfully, there were no major incidents this year, and we want to keep it this way. Right? In summary, I think it's human to be complacent, but as an industry, we should all work together, right, to push for a culture of safety and to ensure that we give safety a chance.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Captain Kevin. Thank you. I'd like to take this opportunity to get one question on the screen for the audience. And the question goes, human error does not mean human error from seafarers only. It includes errors from people operating and managing the vessels ashore. So an interesting question from the audience, and pretty much aligned with what we were talking about, because human factor is just the last human error, the individual. But we should not forget that the humans at the offices ashore are also equally accountable in terms of causing that particular accident. It's not the individual on board. Captain Vijay, your thoughts on this question? What do you make of this comment?
I would agree that humans are humans everywhere.
Right.
And as long as humans are there, there will be errors and mistakes. We need to put systems in place that just because one person made a mistake, the system doesn't crash or collapse. So the more efficient the barriers, the better the system will work. And I agree with the statement. And in fact, most companies are working to address this and reduce these errors.
Right. A similar question on human factor, and this is again a very complex matter, human factors, but when we dissect the human factor, which has been a dominating root cause in the accidents, it is not the lack of knowledge or skills, but the attitude in majority of the cases, which is a behavioral issue and largely impacted by the leadership on board, ship-shore interface, and the culture of loss prevention. Regrettably, ISM code does not focus enough on the behavioral aspects compared to knowledge and skill, which shape the policies and procedure and consequent training. Yes, there is no doubt an element of interpretation. I personally do not fully agree that the ISM code does not address this. It is how the ISM code has been interpreted in the offices ashore. And being an accident investigation body, we've seen that a fair bit of times. And like what Jakob said, we peel the layers of the onion to try and understand whether the procedure itself was complicated enough that it caused a behavioral mindset change on the part of the individuals. But Jakob, your comments to this ISM code comment, whether it is a behavioral issue being adequately addressed?
Well, I agree with you. It's a matter of interpretation, really. I know it's not directly stated in ISM code, as I recall it, with the behavioral aspects. But again, bear in mind the ISM code is just the minimum requirements of what you have to have in place. I think nowadays, like also Captain Vijay said in their company, that they do much more behavioral things, again with the VDR, and also when you do sail along audits, you might have time for what is called behavior-based safety, where you are more like a fly on the wall and try to view how people are doing things, and then after that try to make the report again to see whether there's any changes that can be done to your procedures, to your system, etc. So yeah, maybe when the ISM code came into force, that this behavioral thing was still not something that was thought so much about. It's a fairly new phenomenon, but maybe could be highlighted, but I think it's still down to the interpretation of the ISM code.
Right. Thank you, Jakob. We've been through a fair bit of COVID-related matters in the previous plenary, and arising from the topic of this plenary, we've also recognized that the COVID-19 has, or rather may have, a drastic effect on the individuals when it comes to ensuring ship safety. And Singapore has done a lot in terms of managing COVID-19 challenges. The port has been extremely busy, But there is a question from the audience poll which talks about how has COVID-19, sorry, I'll just get that. How has COVID-19 allowed for, and I'll read it, how digitalization and automation are contributing to risk factors among things, and how much different is the number of accidents that have been occurred before and during the pandemic? Comparatively higher or remain the same? Let's take the second part of the question. As a busy port, do you think, Captain Kevin, the pandemic has, although the numbers you've said are lower, but has the pandemic caused a bit of more minor incidents responses from your side that you have to focus on?
Based on what I observed over the past months, no, there has not been an increase in the number of accidents, right? I think with the pandemic, people, notwithstanding that crew members may have spent quite a bit of time on board the ship, but I feel that there is a certain level of awareness among the crew members, and people are a bit more cautious.
Right. Thank you, Captain Kevin. And Captain Vijay, your thoughts on how shipping would have to adapt to the new norm with COVID-19 being the way we lead forward? I mean, we have seen a fair bit of technological advances. We are a part of it. We're sitting hosting a Safety at Sea webinar, which has never happened. But do you think COVID-19 will cause a disruption in the way shipping gets managed in the new norm?
Surely. I believe, yes, it is changing the direction. It is increasing the digitalization. It is increasing the number of remote operations, whether be audits, whether be technicians giving guidance on how to go about doing repairs, superintendents advising ships. Yes, surely. And here technology is can become an enabler, and we should adopt to it. And in this, it should actually be used as an opportunity to increase digitalization. And by doing this, when I say digitalization, we have to reduce administrative work and load on seafarer from that aspect, make his job easier.
Right.
So that they can go about doing their job more efficiently.
That brings me to a very interesting question from the audience, and I would like for that to come on screen. The ship's officers have not been provided the tools to comply with the procedures. We are behind in technology. On the bridge, for example, the checks should be based on what alarms are active rather than checking each of the equipment. For that to happen, the industry has to adopt technology, and it's rare for the industry voluntarily adopting it. So, again, sorry, it's coming back to you, but Captain Vijay, your thoughts on whether this is achievable from a ship manager's perspective to have a fundamental shift. You know, at some point, I remember ISM code brought out a lot of checklists, and there was a checklist for a checklist for a checklist. And I know the joke, you know where I'm going for, but I'm not going to talk about it now. But so, what do you reckon of this comment from the audience? Technology as an enabler to fundamentally visit. Do we really need a checklist for a checklist? You know, harbor arrival, and so on and so forth. You've got 20 checklists for arriving into a busy port like Singapore. Having 20 checklists doesn't necessarily mean you are that safe. It just means the individual has to focus on those 20 checklists, because if he or she doesn't do it, he or she then has to answer to the auditor who you are sending on board, right? So do you think there's room for technology to try and, yeah?
Yes, very much. Yeah. In fact, the way we are looking at it is remove duplication, make it easy for them to comply. Things remove their typographic or clerical errors. So you reduce a lot of unnecessary load, noise. Right. They can focus on what is really required for the job and go about it more efficiently.
Yeah. And before the industry loses touch with what MP has been doing, Captain Kevin, your thoughts on what you've shared or what you would like to share with the industry, what Singapore has done for the new port and new initiatives by Singapore? Minister Chee Hong Tat was alluding to some fantastic digitalization processes.
Digitalization of processes is something that we have to embrace. Right. But what I personally feel is that we need to keep check and manage the data that we are receiving or pushing out or even requesting for, right? In order not to overwhelm the mariners. Right? Back to the port in terms of initiatives. Remember earlier on you asked about how do we respond to marine casualties?
Right.
What are the initiatives?
Right.
I think the first thing we should remember, our response strategy to marine incidents is to prevent the incident from happening first. But if
Right.
they do,
Right.
then we have marine action plans, right, which are tiered response plans for responding to different scenarios. And these plans are regularly exercised to ensure their relevance, as well as to ensure that the response resources are ready. Even during COVID times, right? This year itself, we have several exercises, comprising tabletop exercises, as well as a full deployment exercise, like the recent joint oil spill exercise at the Sudong anchorage. It involved the deployment of physical assets on the ground, and we took the opportunity to test them under the response processes under COVID environment. Right? Other initiatives that MPA has taken on the launch of the next generation petrocraft, right? Learning from our ops users' experience. The crafts are built with new systems to aid in command and control, to allow our officers to respond to more types of incidents in a shorter period of time. Right? We are also currently working on building a 32-meter catamaran called the Petrocraft Enhanced. It's going to be a bigger platform with more capabilities, including command and control systems.
Right.
We have also renewed the MOU with ITOF. That's the MOU for the oil spill response equipment and vessels rates, right?
Yeah.
Having these rates updated is useful for us when it comes to expeditiously deploying response equipment, which is critical for oil spill response.
Right. Thank you, Captain Kevin. I think that's very, very I should use the word looking forward to technology that the industry wants to, and I gather that the feedback from the users on the ground has led to those initiatives, and perhaps that's what I brought. It allows me to think that from the shipping industry point of view, the more feedback we gather from the users on the ground, the seafarers themselves, that is what will allow us to have an improved safety culture, because there's no point forcing down a safety culture, it's my way or the highway down the throat, when the individual who's using the systems is not convinced. And therefore, I think that's a very important takeaway as far as I can see from here, that gather the feedback from the people on the ground, try and see where do we need to improve rather than just putting out procedures based on regulations which are archaic in that interpretation. We do have time for one live poll, but before I take that, there's one question that I'd quickly like to take on. That is, looking at today's technological, I'm sorry, I think that question got missed out, but yeah, I think that question was answered, sorry. So we have time for a live poll. Could we have that on the screen, please, for the audience? Which area would you wish to see some fundamental changes in the next decade for safe shipping? Okay, the live poll is coming on the screen? Okay. And it's another 10 seconds and we can try and get the answers for that. Can we push out the survey results of that question?
We can take the second question on the screen.
Perhaps after the live poll. While the survey results is coming out, there is another question from the audience, and that is, accidents have been caused through mental stress. Would it perhaps be wise to include mental checkup in addition to their medical checkup? Interesting. Quick thoughts, anybody? It's an open question.
In fact, in the industry, we are already having this where people have a assessment of the mental makeup before they decide on employing people. Especially we were talking about training this using bridge resource management concepts.
Right.
When people are doing these practices in live scenario, we even have psychologists come and observe them and give them inputs. Typically, mostly the faculty can give inputs with regarding to bridge resource management concepts, and people identify gaps and improve. But then there are some gaps which are very subtle, only experts can pick up. Then that experts are also there, part of that, and they do give feedback.
Okay. So there is a framework, but again, it's not internationally accepted or widely accepted. Yeah.
Yeah, if I may add, as Captain just said here, that yes, it is already part of many promotion procedures and all this to have some kind of psychologist looking at the mental stress. Well, they should be part of the medical checkup. I think it's very difficult because a lot of this is in a different situation. I'm not a doctor in any way, so whether he can identify this and whether he'll then on a ship is a different mental stress, and also remembering right now during the pandemic, something's happening because they've been on board for X amount of time, which is far beyond what they should have. So the mental state changes compared to what it might have been when you sat in doctor's office in Nila. So.
No, you have a very valid point, and I think the question was intended in all good flavor, and yes, psychological assessments are useful, but you have to take it with a double-edged sword that can swing the other way. We've got our survey results on. Which area would you wish to see some fundamental changes in the next decade for safe shipping? And nearly 60% of respondents said more commitment of shipping companies. And interestingly enough, there is an element of crew competency framework. Thankfully, nobody said increase in regulation, so I think our plenary has done fairly well, all right. But more commitment for shipping companies. Captain Vijay, thoughts on the question?
Surely from shipping companies, what more they can do is mental well-being, and which industry is looking at it. And in the morning session, we did have gentlemen speaking about it, and especially Shell taking a lot of lead in it.
Right.
And we on our own, before this, for many years, we've been having this psychologist expert where people can speak up. So yes, companies are doing one about from mental well-being. Second is reducing the burden and load on the ship staff. My company, we have introduced a software system, Phoenix software system, which is live and regularly being updated. We are trying to reduce paperwork, digitalize it as much as possible so that it is as need-based, and information is being pushed or thrown at the user instead of him going and trying to pull out information. So things like that, making their job easier to perform.
Right. Interesting. And review of crew competency framework. Jakob, anything that you think this might be of interest from your point, that you need to have a holistic review of how the crew competency is assessed? I mean, it's an IMO level issue, but it is not so straightforward. But any thoughts on that, respondent?
No, yeah, I think within I think I see a lot of our members doing lots of investments in digitalization, as we talked about, as Captain Vijay just said, in new kind of artificial intelligence are tested, new kinds of safety systems which can be used on board, all these things. However, none of these are better than the end user. The user needs to know how it works, what the limitations are, and these things. And of course, if these things are going to be a standard part of bridge design going forward, then of course the STCW as we know it will probably need to be reviewed and include these kind of new digitalization tools that will be available.
Thank you, Jakob, for sharing your thoughts on what we need for the industry to take forward. Quick 1 to 2 minute, Captain Kevin, what do you see the industry? Are we ready to embrace the change after COVID-19 and technological advancements, digitalization?
Excuse me. Digitalization definitely boost maritime safety efforts. We already seeing it in the current COVID pandemic, and many people are sold to technology already. Right? Those who had technology fear, they have learned to accept it. More importantly, I come back to my earlier point on the need for safety culture. I think the onus is really on the individual himself, right? So, given current times, my advice is that please take care of yourself so that you can take care of the people around you.
No, that's a very valid point. Thank you, Captain Kevin. Captain Vijay, last thoughts? We're ending the plenary, so anything for the audience to key takeaway? 1 minute.
Okay. This COVID story is the story of sacrifice and bravery of our seafarers and have kept the sea trading going. And it's something that we all should be thankful and appreciate their efforts. So, and human beings will be human beings, and they're rather prone to make mistakes. So to counter this, we have to continue building strong systems and safety cultures.
Thank you, Captain Vijay. I do hope the audience has taken advantage of the tall order that we had, and I do apologize in case we did not answer some of your questions. Rest assured, the panel tried their best to give you an insight from their perspective, and we do certainly hope, as Captain Vijay rightly pointed out, that the seafarers out there are burning the midnight oil, so to speak, to keep our economies moving. And it is the responsibility of everybody, as noted by the keynote speakers, as well as the opening address at the conference, that this is not something we have to take lightly. So I do wish you all a very good health, and thank you once again for being a part of this plenary. Have a good day.
Thank you, Captain Kunal, Mr. Yaakob, Captain Vijay, and Captain Kevin for your thoughts and your sharing. And that concludes Plenary 2 of the International Safety at Sea webinar series. Do join us for our final session at 4:30 p.m. Singapore time, when we put the spotlight on ship management, lessons learned for safety and standards in the new normal, and announce the winners for the MPA International Safety at Sea Awards. We would also like to get your views on today's session. We hope that you can take a few minutes to complete a feedback form that will pop up later when you exit this webinar. And last but not least, you can take part in our quiz at the end of each session to win Amazon gift vouchers worth 50 Singapore dollars. To qualify, just scan the QR code or click on the link posted in the chat window. Answer all the questions correctly, and you could be one of 3 lucky winners randomly drawn per session. Winners will be notified by email, and if you are not based in Singapore, you will receive an equivalent USD value for the Amazon gift voucher. Good luck! And on that note, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at 4:30 p.m. Goodbye!